Night had long since enveloped the estate of Lord Harrington when I arrived, my carriage wheels crunching over the gravel of a winding drive. The thick canopy of cypress trees shifted and groaned in the midnight breeze, as if unhappy to yield their secrets. I disembarked near the ornate iron gates leading into the garden, able to see only a fraction of the expansive property by moonlight. Shadows stretched over every stone and shrub, masking the statues that dotted the estate in uncanny silhouettes. Though I knew little of the place beyond rumors, apprehension clung to my bones the moment I stepped onto the sodden ground. Lord Harrington himself welcomed me at the entrance to his ancestral home, a looming manor whose architectural splendor had been dulled by decades of time. High arch windows, once filled with vibrance and candlelight, were dim and opaque. The grand door, wrought with intricate carvings of vines and wide-aimed faces, opened silently to let me in. Harrington was a tall, thin man whose austere demeanor suggested a lifetime of bitterness. He led me inside with few words, his footsteps echoing in the forlorn corridors. Eventually, he paused in the foyer, turning to regard me with a mix of curiosity and resignation. "You come highly recommended," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "A scholar of the occult who might provide answers, or comfort at least. If you can decipher what plagues my estate, well, I shall be in your debt." We had exchanged letters for months, ever since his suspicion that something far stranger than mere local folklore lingered on his land. I had brushed it off at first. Plenty of noble families keep eccentric stories and pass them down to add morbid charm, but Harrington's pleas resonated with a dreadful sincerity, and so I arrived to witness firsthand the phenomenon he claimed occurred every midnight. I assured him I would do my best. He led me down a corridor lined with faded tapestries, the threadbare scenes depicting heroes doing battle with twisted monsters in dark forests. "Before midnight strikes, you must witness the garden," Harrington said, voice subdued with anticipation. "They move. They relive something. Their last breaths, perhaps. All that is left of their mortal existence plays out before my eyes." His hollow gaze turned away. "And there is nothing I can do to stop them." "Who are they?" I asked. He halted at a tall window overlooking the estate's famous garden. The moon washed the grounds in silver, revealing stone statues, perhaps dozens of them, standing in various poses. Some represented figures of robed women with grieving expressions. Others appeared as knights in mid-strike, swords raised against unseen foes. One statue near the center was half crumbled, missing an arm. Under the moonlight, the broken figure's face seemed contorted with despair. "My ancestors," Harrington said gravely, "as well as other lost souls. Those who died in service to the Harringtons, or those who once threatened us. The garden is both a tribute and a warning. The older generations believed in preserving knowledge through sculpture, though the method has grown suspicious over the centuries. Now, every midnight, these statues come alive." I had heard rumors of cursed sculptures before, but had dismissed them as cryptic tales. Yet, Harrington's trembling voice spoke of genuine fear. He guided me onward to a drawing room where a small fire crackled in the hearth. We sat in two worn armchairs. Regal portraits loomed overhead from gilded frames, a woman with painted sorrow in her eyes, a man in elaborate armor, a child with an unsettling smile. I felt as though each portrait was an overseer, subtly judging. Harrington poured whiskey into our glasses. As the flames cast dancing shadows across his face, he recounted the events. The statues were crafted over the centuries. Each time the Harrington bloodline ended some dispute or lost someone dear, a statue was added. I do not know if it was a cunning sculptor's trick or if my forebears delved into darker arts. But after my father passed, the estate's caretaker claimed to see movements at midnight. I witnessed it myself soon enough. He paused, tilted his glass, and stared into the amber liquid. During the day, the statues are ordinary cold stone, but with each stroke of midnight, they stir. I hear the scrape of stone on stone, Then they walk or crawl, stepping into the moonbeams. They appear as they must have in life, reenacting their final hours, the screams, the pleas, the violence. His gaze slipped to the window, a shiver passing through him. They do not notice me. They are lost in their last moments. What I see, what I hear, is enough to drive anyone mad. Wanting to study the phenomenon myself, I excused myself to explore the estate. I had time before midnight arrived. Roaming the corridors, I was haunted by the sensation that the many paintings' eyes tracked me. Silent hallways gave way to a library stuffed with ancient tomes, dusty volumes whose covers bore occult symbols and scribbled notes. From the margins, names had been carefully scratched out, as if to obscure a dire secret. The flicker of candlelight revealed sketches of each statue in the garden, accompanied by accounts detailing the cause of death. They read, Lady Eloise Harrington, perished from heartbreak. Mary the Maid, executed for betrayal. Sir Alistair Harrington, died in a duel at dawn, and so forth. The clock struck 11 while I leafed through the last pages. The stiff parchment detailed a cryptic ritual, describing how to seal the souls within stone, preserving their final echoes. I recalled Harrington's words. He suspected dabbling in strange arts by his ancestors. If these words were accurate, the garden was not just a memorial, but a prison for restless spirits. The text concluded abruptly. No instructions on reversing the ritual existed, only an ominous note. They must suffer night after night, tethered to our domain. When the clock hands crept closer to midnight, I made my way outside. The air was cold and thick, carrying the scent of damp earth. Clouds drifted across the moon. I passed through the iron gate into the garden. Stunted hedges, once likely a masterpiece of topiary, were now unkempt. The stone figures lined the main pathway, stoic in their stasis. My boots collided with the broken stones of a mosaic beneath my feet, each shard depicting swirling shapes and strange runes. I halted, trailing my lantern over the faces of the statues. The flickering light made the stone appear flesh-like for a moment, revealing faint cracks like veins. A chilling wind caused the garden's smaller shrubs to tremble. Though I felt 1,000 prying eyes on me, the sculptures remained still. Somewhere in the manor, the grandfather clock began its slow toll for midnight. The final chime reverberated in my chest. First, I perceived no change aside from a hush descending on the grounds. Then, I heard the rasping sound of stone sliding against stone. A faint murmur drifted through the air. I spun about, the lantern's light capturing a statue, and saw a regal knight shuddering, its stony joints twisting in motion. A second statue stiffly turned its head, as though awakened from a centuries-long slumber. Their eyes were not the blank hollows I expected. Instead, faint pinpoints of ghostly light glowed within them. Sluggishly, they raised their limbs. Torsos bent, arms flexed, and legs jerked into a limp, macabre dance. As more statues came to life, their hollow voices reverberated against the garden walls, weaving a tapestry of anguish and fury. Closest to me, a robed woman seemed to kneel, eyes lowered. Upon closer look, I recognized her from one of the sketches. Lady Eloise, who, legend said, had died from heartbreak after her children were taken by a fever. She clutched at her chest, her parted lips silently mouthing words of sorrow. And then, almost imperceptibly, she wailed a raw and grieving note that rose from deep in her throat. It was as if stone chords vibrated with real breath. I found myself surrounded by these tragic figures, ensnared in their last moments. Sir Alistair drew his sword and swung it through the air, imagining an enemy. Another statue, representing a scullery maid, collapsed to the ground with an expression of terror etched into the stone, her mouth contorted in a silent scream. One by one, they replayed the horror leading to their demise. Though I had anticipated mere movement, Nothing could prepare me for the voices, tortured moans, desperate cries, frantic pleas for mercy, layered of murmur that circled around me in the garden's dreaded heart. My lantern trembled in my grasp. I knew these echoes were fragments of final experiences, but they felt so agonizingly real that I nearly believed I stood within the chaotic swirl of the estate's darkest days. Stone footfalls approached. I turned to see a statue I hadn't noticed before. It was half hidden behind an overgrown rosebush. The face was locked in an expression of rage, the posture hunched as if in the midst of a lethal strike. Intricate detail revealed the statue's once lively attire, a noble's tunic, complete with a Harrington crest. The figure's one visible hand clutched a broken bit of stone that might have served as a weapon. Then, in an appalling lurch, the statue charged forward, straight at me. Reflex overwhelmed reason. I dove aside, scraping my palms on the gravel. The statue's stone arm swiped through the space where I had been. I expected a cold collision of rock, but instead, my shoulder brushed a fleeting sensation of decayed flesh. A chill coursed through my entire being. I scrambled to my feet, hearing a guttural growl escape the statue's mouth. An agonized cry distracted the charging figure. From another corner of the garden, one statue was reenacting some murder or violent betrayal. The half-broken noble turned to watch, as though synchronized by some unholy bond. I seized that reprieve to back away. Harrington, who had been standing near the gate, rushed to my side, eyes filled with alarm. "You see now," he said in a trembling tone, "this is what plagues me. They have no mercy, no softness, only the final act of their mortal life, repeated endlessly." The robed woman wailed again, filling the air with whispered heartbreak. Harrington clutched my arm. "We must leave them to it. Come inside," he urged. "Staying too long in their midst can be dangerous." Once back within the manor's walls, I found my heart pounding and my mind racing with questions. Clearly, these were no ordinary hauntings. Without a means of release, these tortured souls would remain trapped in their own final breath, year after year, midnight after midnight, and I sensed that each performance drained them, piece by piece, of any remnant of humanity they once possessed. Safe behind bolted doors, we strove for calm. "There has to be a way to free them," I said, setting the lantern aside. "Whatever your ancestors did, they anchored these spirits to the garden. If I can find some ritual or incantation, something to untether them, then maybe they can find rest." Harrington's face paled. "My family left no such knowledge. We only know how to build the statues. We never learned to undo them. It was always believed that once a soul was captured, it would remain, forever bound to the Harrington line, an eternal guard against our enemies. Or an eternal reminder of our tragedy." Still shaken, I spent the next day poring over the library's volumes. My fingers grew black with the dust of centuries. The texts described incantations in archaic language and illusions that bound life essence to stone. At one point, I discovered a slew of genealogical records naming each figure in the garden. Among them, I saw references to Auric Harrington, who purportedly was so consumed by envy and rage that he murdered his own brother. The brother, in turn, was rumored to have cursed Auric's line. The curses, always half-formed in the scribbled notes, hinted that Auric's descendants would live with the constant manifestation of the ones they wronged. That night, as the hush of approaching midnight filled the halls, Harrington and I prepared to revisit the garden. This time, I armed myself with a half-forgotten incantation, gleaned from a hidden page. According to one footnote, it might quell the restless stone. Yet, the text was incomplete. I hoped instinct and a sense of faith might guide me. We stepped into the moonlit garden as the last notes of the clock's 12 chimes dissolved in the cool air. Once more, the hush fell like a funeral shroud. Then, one by one, the statues stirred. I forced myself to stand in their midst, ignoring every survival instinct that screamed for me to run. I could smell the subtle scent of decay from the illusions, could feel the thick aura of sorrow that clung to each figure. Holding my lantern high, I began chanting the ancient words I had memorized, a litany of release, calling upon forces unknown to break the binds that fettered souls to stone. My voice trembled, but I persisted. As I uttered each phrase, the swirling moans and whispers in the garden intensified, colliding with my chant in a discordant echo. Statues twisted their heads toward me, as if noticing my presence in their reenactments for the first time. A bright flicker of silver flashed among them, and I realized one statue advanced with sword raised. Sir Alistair, locked forever in his duel. But instead of ignoring me, he lunged, stone feet crashing against the mosaic underfoot. I heard Harrington shout my name, but I steeled my nerves. I knew if I faltered in the incantation, everything would be lost. My words became louder, echoing into the night sky. Alistair's sword descended. Instinctively, I dropped to my knees, but instead of stone slicing into me, the blade possessed above my head with a ghostly resonance. A groan, like rock grinding into itself, erupted from Alistair's chest. He staggered back as though an invisible force repelled him. The robed woman, Lady Eloise, turned her face to me. Tears eternally carved in stone. I could see, in her lunar-illuminated eyes, desperation and yearning. Emboldened, I kept chanting. A faint shimmer swept across the statues, a pale glow reminiscent of moonlit mist. Rather than continuing their dreadful pantomimes, they froze. Their shrieks and murmurs built up until the cacophony was overwhelming. I wondered if this meant the incantation was succeeding, if perhaps they would finally be set free. Then, without warning, an unseen force shattered the air. My lantern flickered out, plunging the garden into near-total darkness. For a moment, everything went silent and still. I thought I had succeeded, but just as my eyes adjusted to the moonlight, I saw the statues quiver again. Their final performance resumed, more aggressive than before. Fingers reached skyward, swords clashed against invisible foes, and pained howls murmured into the night. My incantation had failed. I stumbled toward Harrington, who grabbed my arm and pulled me away from a swirling talus of contorted stone forms. We both nearly slipped on the gravel. Confusion hammered at my thoughts. Could it be that the text was incomplete, missing a crucial passage? Perhaps I had the wrong approach entirely. The statues were anchored here by an ancient malefic force, something more potent than simple ritual could banish. Harrington, face lined with terror, shouted above the din, "We must get out now!" We ran back into the manor, unsteady, the door slamming shut behind us. My breathing was ragged. The repeated failure weighed on me. All those souls, I realized, were left to suffer once more. When I looked into Harrington's hollow gaze, I recognized dread and despair. How many times had he tried to intervene in his own way, only to face the same dreadful outcome? Minutes or hours passed while we slumped in the hallway, ears still ringing with the echo of the statue's cries. Finally, Harrington spoke. "There is one final place I never showed you. It has been locked for as long as I can remember, the crypt beneath the east wing." We lit fresh lanterns and walked to the far side of the manor. The corridor ended at a heavy door bearing a crest identical to the Harrington family seal. A serpent coiled around a broken sword. Inside, steps spiraled down to a stone crypt. The air was cool and stale, smelling of old clay and unburied secrets. Our lanterns revealed rows of coffin-like alcoves, each meant for a Harrington ancestor. At the far end stood a pedestal with a battered tome. We carefully lifted the book from its resting place. Its binding was frayed leather, embossed with occult symbols. Within, I found weathered parchment describing the final shape of all cursed, a passage referencing the key to dissolve them. "Blood of the line, offered in amends," read one line, "shall unmake that which was wrought in cruelty." Harrington seemed to recoil at the notion. Hosted deep in his lineage was the guilt of Oryx's act of fratricide, and the cycle continued as each generation was forced to pay some measure of penance. "It wants my blood," Harrington whispered, voice nearly lost amid the dusty hush. "The curse requires a willing sacrifice from the living heir to pay the debt begun centuries ago. Only then can the rest cease reliving their final moments." A clang of metal came from somewhere above us. I swallowed hard. If that is truly the way, we must do it. Think of them, Lady Eloise, Sir Alistair, and all the others. They're tormented every midnight. Harrington set the book aside, eyes distant. "And if I refuse?" The moment stretched in the silence of the crypt. Then we ascended into the main hall. The clock showed we were far past midnight now, the house subdued in gloom. He led me to a small chapel room with an altar and stained-glass windows. We each carried a candle. Harrington's expression was hollow resignation as we prepared a small ritual circle, guided by the half-deciphered instructions in the crypt's tome. The steps required him to place a single drop of his blood on a medallion etched with the Harrington crest, then recite an oath of atonement to the souls trapped by his ancestry. We began, Harrington's voice scarcely audible as he read the vow. "I, of Harrington blood, submit to the wrongdoing of my forebears. I offer my heart's essence, in humility, so all who suffer might be freed." He pierced the tip of his finger with a sterile needle, letting a bead of blood drip onto the medallion. Crimson rivulets spread across the engraved lines. For an instant, the flame of my candle wavered, and I felt an uncanny ripple in the air. Then an anguished screech rose, as if from outside the manor's walls. It reverberated through us, chilling every nerve. The souls in the garden. Did they sense the attempt to break their chains? Clutching the medallion, Harrington stumbled, his energy seemingly sapped. I helped him remain upright. The text suggested this ritual would be complete by morning's first light. So we kept watch, hearts pounding, as the old darkness pressed closer. The rest of the night was punctuated by ghostly wails echoing from beyond the windows, but neither Harrington nor I dared leave the chapel. With every passing hour, the candlelight dwindled. A suffocating sense of finality weighed on us. Though exhausted, Harrington never let go of the medallion. He repeated his vow as best he could, voice trembling. When the horizon finally glowed with dawn's pale fingers, the cryptic gloom receded. I hurried to the garden. Overhead, gray clouds parted to reveal a red-tinged sunrise. The statues remained in place, inert. I brushed a hand over Lady Eloise's cold stone cheek, half expecting her to stir. But she did not. There was only complete stillness, as though the garden were finally free from the nightly torment. My eyes scanned each figure, searching for any remnant of that ghostly glow. Gone. All that remained were statues, silent and unmoving, free of the anguished illusions that had tormented them for ages. I heard Harrington's footsteps behind me. We exchanged a glance, and the relief in his gaze was unmistakable. His face was pale and drawn, but he managed a weak smile. We both knew that something had changed in the garden. Still, my heart ached for the countless souls who had endured centuries of horror beneath the moonlight. Perhaps in those final hours before dawn, Lord Harrington's blood sacrifice, his act of atonement, had severed their chains. My gaze lingered on the robed statue of Lady Eloise, whose eyes now appeared serenely closed. The lines of sorrow softened. Harrington and I walked the estate together. The day was bright, though the ground still held the memory of secrets. As I packed my belongings and prepared to depart, he spoke quietly. "Thank you," he said. "I can already feel it. The quiet is different now. My family's burden has finally lifted. May they find peace." Before I climbed into my carriage, I turned to look back at the statues, standing silently in the gentle light. They no longer seemed menacing. Instead, they represented a long history, encapsulated and finally laid to rest. The tortured movements and relentless echoes had gone, leaving only a hushed, if somber, tranquility. The driver cracked the reins, and the carriage rolled away, leaving behind that orchard of stone. I gazed out the small window as we passed the iron gates, feeling the faint breeze carry a final farewell. The restless spirits, once clamoring for release from their nightly prison, had gone on to whatever realm awaited them after their torment. They left behind only hushed memories and sturdy monuments to a dark and tangled heritage. I could not say whether the Harrington line was redeemed forever, or if new misdeeds might someday resurrect old ghosts. But in that moment, I believed I had witnessed true absolution for those still and silent forms. No longer slaves to midnight reenactments, they could remain at peace in their sculpted existence. For the first time, their granite eyes beheld morning without dread. And as my carriage disappeared into the mist-shrouded road, I too felt something within my spirit ease, knowing that at last their final echoes had been laid to rest.